Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, Dan McQuillin brings us up to date on ViLoR, on Digital Table, Bionic Table, and Bionic Picnic. So much, so strange, so future-looking. It's all coming up next on TWiRT. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store, with outstanding service, savings, and support. Online at bgs.cc. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. By Nautel, keeping you connected with your community with support and webinars. Online at nautel.com/webinars. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to the light bulb at the top of the tower. I'm Kirk Harnack. I'm in the Telos Alliance studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, for this 491st episode of This Week in Radio Tech. Well, we are having a few technical difficulties today. Seems like some of the internet is not wanting to play nice, or maybe some servers are down. So I got to hand it to Suncast, our producer. He real quick reconfigured the studio to accept our video over Skype. And we usually don't use Skype to do the show anymore. We usually use vMix Call, but there may be some kind of a problem with vMix Call. And so Suncast has reconfigured to get that working. So this is the show where we talk about radio technology, and I'm going to go ahead and bring our guest, Dan McQuillin, in. And Dan, I've got an announcement to do after we bring you in. But Dan, I'm in Nashville. You are somewhere near London, right?
I'm just south of London, about an hour south of London, just north of Brighton, at home, as we all are. So all I do is I sit here at home. I talk into Zoom, Skype, team calls all day long. So this is pretty much it, right, for the lockdown. But that's fine because when you work in radio, I think everybody who works in radio has this deep-seated personal desire to be as socially distant as possible at all times. So you're where you are. I'm here, and that is much more natural than us all being in Las Vegas. So yeah, we'll make this work.
I'll tell you what, as the show moves along here in just a moment, we're going to tease what's coming up. But I can promise you, the reason we have Dan McQuillin on is Dan always has some incredibly interesting technology that's typically at the forefront of thought about content creation. And that's why I like to have Dan on. Dan's an engineer, he's a software developer, and he's kind of a visionary in terms of, hey, what do people really want to consume? How do they want to consume it? And how can we make that happen? So in a moment, Dan's going to give us a little tease as to what we'll be looking at. And we're also going to be evaluating or reviewing a big idea in virtualization. That's coming up. Let me check in real quick and see, has Chris Tobin made it in yet? Is he here? Is that a thumbs up or thumbs down? I saw him for a second, then he went away. We'll say no for now, but hey, if we pop Chris Tobin up, go ahead and pop him up when he shows up. I want to tell you about something else that you should be aware of. It is less than a week away from today. We're producing the show on Thursday, April the 30th, but coming up on Wednesday, and I believe that is May the 7th, Geoff Welton, who's been on the show, and Alex Hartman, who's also been on the show, they're getting together for an overview and a live demonstration of the Nautel Looking Glass product. This incredible technology that that Alex Hartman has really driven home and put together along with efforts from Leif Clayson. And now Nautel is adding their mighty muscle behind this Looking Glass product. It's a new product that monitors, records, and analyzes up to 30 discrete FM frequencies at the same time. No tuning from one FM to another. This thing grabs most, if not all, of the FM dial. You can discover what Looking Glass can do for your radio station or your cluster of stations in a webinar on Thursday, May 7th at noon Eastern Time. That's 11 o'clock in the morning for me here in Nashville, and you can figure your time from there. But noon Eastern Time on Thursday, May the 7th. Got that date right? I think so. As always, there's going to be time for your questions, and you can earn 1/2 of an SBE recertification credit. So you attend these webinars put on by Nautel, and you can get that recertification credit. That's a real help too. Go to nautel.com/webinars to register for this. nautel.com/webinars. I'm going to be there. I hope you will be too, and you'll get a great look at this Looking Glass product. Geoff Welton will be there, and Alex Hartman as well. All right. So Dan McQuillin, I ask you to tease this because if if my fellow engineers and friends watching or listening to today's show knew what's coming up, they would certainly not tune away. What are some of the things that we're going to be looking at as the show moves on?
So the plan is we're going to look at what we learned by not going to Las Vegas, what we would have learned if we had gone to Las Vegas, what we learned by virtualizing all of the 40 BBC local radio stations, and what we're learning right now about reducing radio studios to their smallest possible size. What happens if you take a radio studio and shrink it until you can't shrink it any further?
Oh, gosh. Oh my! I thought we were doing that, but I think you've got an idea that is even beyond what we've been doing. So that sounds good. That sounds good. Hey, and just before we move into the first topic, which I think we're going to take a great evaluative look at a huge virtualization project, and I want to know how that has come out and what the upshot is. I want to tell you about what you ought to have in your studio, and that is this. This is the new Bluetooth gadget from our friends at Angry Audio. Dan, you probably know this guy. I know you do. You know Michael Catfish Dosh. He has been making some really cool products, and this is one of them, the Bluetooth gadget from Angry Audio. If you need a telephone hybrid in your studio, well, this is not exactly a hybrid. It uses the telephone technology in your smartphone connected by Bluetooth, and now you've got phone calls on the air through the Bluetooth gadget from angryaudio.com. This also, though, will do another thing. It will let you play audio out of your phone, and sometimes that may be some good audio. You may have gone out and done an interview, or you've got some songs or videos. You want to play the audio from them on your radio station through your audio console. You do it with the Bluetooth audio gadget. On the back, it has a digital output with AES-3 digital audio. It has analog left and right outputs, and it has an analog audio input. These connect to your console, and it doesn't have to be an expensive console. My goodness, of course, it can be a console from, say, Axia, but it could also be a Behringer console or a Mackie console. Any inexpensive console, create your mix minus by using the aux buses, and you've got a terrific interface into your phone. By the way, the Bluetooth gadget will also determine what your phone is doing. If you want to have a two-way conversation, as with a phone caller, it automatically determines that and sets up a two-way connection over Bluetooth with your phone. If you want to just play high-quality audio out of your phone or record onto your phone from the Bluetooth gadget, it'll set up a very high-quality audio connection. The Bluetooth is no longer the limiting factor in audio quality with the Bluetooth gadget. Check it out at angryaudio.com, and you can find their dealers everywhere because they're available through almost all the dealers. Check them out at angryaudio.com. Okay, it's Kirk Harnack and Dan McQuillin here. Dan, I want to first establish some incredible credibility. 10 years ago, we started talking about an idea that the BBC had to refurbish their studios, and they had kind of a dilemma. This big thing called ViLoR came along. Can you give us the little elevator speech on ViLoR, and how is it working out at this point?
So the reasoning behind ViLoR was the BBC has 40 local radio stations around the UK, which have an important role in broadcasting local news, music, and information. In fact, probably right now in these kind of conditions, radio in general is never more important than when we have to bring that sort of public information to people. But they had a problem. It was taking approximately 15 years to go around and refresh all 40 of those local radio stations as they templated a new technical rollout, which meant back before the internet, back before digital, back before all of the modern technology, the earliest stations were really, really dated, but it just wasn't affordable or practical to go around and rebuild 40 radio stations and take another 15 years. So we worked with the BBC and with Axia and with their playout provider and figured out a way that we could build just 2 VLRCs or data centers at different points in the UK and put all of the equipment from 600 racks around the UK into around about a dozen racks in just those 2 data centers. And then all they have at those remote sites is a little piece of Axia Fusion mixing console, but just the top part of it. The back end, the mix engine, everything else is 500 miles away in the data center. And if that sounds crazy now, we were doing this 10 years ago in trials and testing. And then over the last, it's now been fully on air, all 40 radio stations, 80 studios on air, live 18 hours a day, each 7 days a week. for the last year and about 3 years for the rollout. So we condensed 15 years into 3 years of rollout. One new radio station went on the air every 8 weeks, actually faster than that because there were two teams. It took 8 weeks to rebuild each station, and there were two teams working 4 weeks apart. So every 4 weeks they could push it out. If you're doing the maths, that's less than 3 years, but we kept having elections, so it was not helpful. But we came in pretty much on time. We came in £1 million, so just over $1 million under budget. They saved around 70% of the cost of, it wasn't just that they saved about 10 to 12 years of time, but they saved about 70% of the money. So they did it for about 30% of what it would have cost. And it's really allowed them to keep generating local content. So lots of stations have networked in ways that network everything, but it doesn't leave the creativity and the content and the talent at the edge. And what's beautiful about the way ViLoR works is it's fabulous technology. That virtualizes and centralizes all of the technology in those data centers. It means those data centers are very cheap and efficient in terms of power, in terms of air conditioning, in terms of the engineering and support infrastructure that you need. It means when we roll out new software technology, it doesn't take 15 years, it takes 15 minutes. We update the two data centers and all 40 of those sites have got the new software and the new capabilities. So it's very flexible, it's very forward thinking, but it means that we keep the creative and the editorial at the edge, and we centralize just those engineering and those technical functions. And it's engineered to work really very reliably because, as well as what IP has done with using reliable IT switches, we're using all of the other techniques and capabilities of resilience, which are now baked into the way that you design modern data centers, modern communications infrastructure. So it generates a really resilient, really reliable fabric, and allows the BBC to continue to deliver this critical local service in a way which is scalable and affordable for the future.
I want to point out, and I have before in some public talks, and I'm sure you have too, the workflow for the people at the studios is basically unchanged from what they were used to for years. They still have what looks like a console in front of them, and they still, access phone callers and codecs, and of course their playlist. This all continues as normal as far as the people on the air are concerned, right?
If you're as nerdy as I am, and if you're as proud as I am of our teams and the BBC's teams for doing this, it is disappointingly, non-apparent when you're in the studio. You walk into a regular studio, there's a console, you move it, you speak, and it is as if nothing has changed. So yes, we're incredibly proud of the fact that the people who are using this have no idea that this alchemy is happening. What they see when they walk into a studio is a regular radio studio. They open the fader, they have computers from which they can select any source across the BBC. They have all of their play out, but all of that's happening 500 miles away. The only difference, one of the war stories that you guys love, is that BBC radio, local radio anyway, is typically fairly pedestrian. But they have one radio presenter who joined quite recently, I think BBC Radio Leeds, Stephanie Hurst, who is a little bit more of a dynamic character. And she started beatboxing along to one of the songs from her remote radio studio, and showed up a little bit of a latency difference that she thought she had nailed the beatboxing, which she did when she heard it. And then she went and heard the listen again from home. And of course, she was, a few milliseconds out because there is an additional round trip latency between what she hears in her local mix and remotely. So you can get caught out by the occasional millisecond of delay here and there. But, in the last, I think we've had probably 6 years that since we started prototyping, we've had these radio stations, on the air in increasing numbers, and really only 2 or 3, significant incidents based on anything from a fire suppression system going off to a fiber being chopped, to probably the main engineering difficulty was. And at any given time when we have an outage, we're talking about a few seconds of outage followed by a couple of minutes of some loss of functionality, and then the whole system is restored. But one of the difficult things we learned was that when you turn all of this national complex architecture and you architect it really, really well, you turn the occasional car accident, or quite frequent car accidents, into the occasional plane crash. So, when something goes wrong with enterprise architecture at this scale, you are affecting 40 radio stations simultaneously, and people pay attention to that. So it's super resilient. The number of small errors and dropouts that you get during the day, during the week, and have reduced to almost zero. And we've had a few seconds of interruption over the last 5 or 6 years. But when you interrupt 40 radio stations simultaneously for 2 seconds, people pay attention. So you have to engineer it differently, war game it differently, and run that operation differently. And probably the worst war story we had from the managed part of the infrastructure was actually not a complete failure, but a partial failure between the two data centers. And that led one data center to see the other one and then not, see the other one and not, and flipping backwards and forwards like that. As far as our systems were concerned, we worked perfectly if both data centers were there, perfectly if only one data center was there. But when they kept coming and going, that meant there are 10,000 audio streams floating around those ViLoR data centers. There are 1,000 devices, and as they chopped dynamically from one to the other, then that caused some issues in the Cisco and everything else. So we had to then tune the way that was failing over, and now it will not cut backwards and forwards in that way. So for sure we've got smarter at scale, but virtualization, there are really 80 radio studios, 40 radio stations on air as we speak, on air 24/7, and there is nothing in their racks room, and there is nothing actually flowing through that mixing console. It's just a keyboard talking to a data center that's several hundred miles away.
And just to clear up a common question that people have is the people who are in a studio speaking with each other, they hear each other with very low latency because that's local. But then their microphones are sent to the data centers to be mixed with the other audio that's in the data center. And when they hear the audio that comes back from the data center, it's minus themselves. That's taken care of locally. So you end up with, I might call a super mix minus in each direction so that the people don't hear themselves on a slapback. And the only problem, and it's not really a problem in radio, but when you if you were trying to play along instruments with your friends or even sing along with your friends, and your friends are several dozens of milliseconds away, that's a scenario that's not likely to work out.
Please don't beatbox live. Yeah, Stephanie learned that the hard way. She did it once and she thought, oh my goodness, I must have got that wrong. And then she did it a second time. And then actually last year at IBC, she came and accosted me and said, we need to sort out this issue. I want a beatbox. And we have a technical solution for that, but it's not in place yet.
Well, Dan, we really tried to elude Chris Tobin today, but he's outsmarted us. He's come in here. Chris, are you with us from New York?
I am. I hope you can hear me fine.
Yes, we can. Hear you great.
Good to see you, Dan.
And thanks to both you and Suncast for trying to get connected. We had to switch over to a whole new system to get this show on the air due to some other technical problems, and thank you all for doing it. And Chris, you already know what Dan was talking about with the BBC's ViLoR project. We were just finishing that up. Although I do have a conceptual question for Dan, and although Dan might ask it back of me since I work for a company that makes audio codecs, would we ever be able to get to a latency situation low enough where people in different areas could actually participate in the making of a musical or some kind of coordinated thing? And by the way, with all this social distancing, my little 9-year-old son, his children's choir tried to set up a sing-along online, and it was a complete disaster, even though Zoom was working perfectly. But you just can't that latency doesn't work. Dan, do you think is there any technology that might come along that get this latency down within just a very few milliseconds? Super accurate clocking is letting us reduce jitter buffers and the latency as much as we can. The distance, obviously, there is a fundamental quotient of the speed of light. And the internet does not move against popular conception at the speed of light. It moves at about 80% of the speed of light. So for technical reasons. So yes, there are people doing it. There is some low latency software that you can purchase now that lets you do that over reasonable distances. And in fact, during these COVID times, we've seen certain artists put that on. You have to allow for that latency, but you can get it down to a very small number of milliseconds, as long as you're not talking a long distance. I mean, my transatlantic hop to you is 120 odd milliseconds right now. Yeah. So
There's not, that's just the geography of it. So if we don't go via satellite and we use very accurate clocks and don't use much buffering, then we can get that down. But that will be a fundamental limitation of the way that that we have all of this various remote connectivity for sure.
Well, if the music we were trying to do together was ethereal music over whole notes held over several measures, not so much a problem. Quarter notes, 16th notes, 30-second notes, yeah, they can become problematic with that kind of delay. Hey, let's jump into then we've established ViLoR working great, and although a different war game, a different strategy necessary to handle, instead of little individual problems at stations that typically have happened over time, now we're looking at it when one problem happens, it affects a lot of stations, and mitigation has gone on for that. Let's look at what we would have seen at NAB. At least give us a little preview of what we'll be talking about. Camera 1, Gecko, and a tease for Table. What are we talking about here?
Well, obviously we didn't get to go to Vegas this year, but I think we've all actually learnt more by not going to Vegas than by going to Vegas. We've been taking technology and talking about the future and talking about virtualization and talking about WebRTC for the last 5 years, and necessity is the mother of invention. We have now all, by staying at home, changed more, learned more than the last 5 years of going to Vegas. So we were this year going to bring Camera One, which is a new offer from us. We have a new range of products. Last year we launched Caller One, which is a really simple SIP talk show system. Camera One is the world's simplest visualization system. So we have one of the world's more sophisticated visualization systems called Bionic Director, which is used by most of the world's big broadcasters to visualize radio, typically for live video streams and also for creating social clips for sharing on social media. We wanted to democratize that all the way down. So there are some really cheap cameras, there's some really cheap little video switches. So the A10 Mini is about $200, $300. And so we enable you to remote control those incredibly simply. So the user interface is entirely in a web browser. You run a very simple Windows service on a machine, and that's it. So, not just my idea of simple, but my mother's idea of simple, of something which, the whole idea of that particular range of the one product is, everyone can afford it, anyone can use it. It's really democratizing what we've done in these larger broadcasters and making it available to absolutely everybody.
You've mentioned, Dan, a couple times to me, and I'd like you to tell Chris too. You've mentioned this product from ATEM. That's a mark of Black Magic, I believe. What is this thing you're talking about, and why is it key to making a simple studio camera switching product?
So ATEM have had originally the 1ME, these larger sort of 10 camera boxes, and they were in the several $1,000s kind of range, still very affordable compared to a traditional vision mixer. And then below that, they bought the Television Studio, which is 8 cameras, 4 HDMI, 4 SDI, digital video effects, and so on. And then I think it was at last year's NAB, they launched the A10 Mini, which is a very small little desktop box that has 4 HDMI connectors in the back. It has 4 big red buttons on the front, so you can manually switch cameras on it. It has digital video effects for doing DVE push and squeeze. It has the encoder built in, so you can plug USB from there to your PC. And that whole piece, as I say, is in the region of around $300. And that's all of the video elements you need to do everything from your studio. Plug 4 cameras into that and run our software up on a separate PC. It uses the USB back to that PC to do all of the recording, all of the streaming, sends graphics over to it, and does all the camera switching based on audio. All you then need is either a network audio console, so an Axia console or anything which we can sniff the audio or the metering from the network to do the camera triggering. Or in that particular model, you can just put a cheap multi-channel sound card in that same PC and just connect it. So you could put it in your Behringer or your Mackie desk, plug a couple of HDMI mounted cameras in, and you have everything that we can do in one of these flagship kind of marquee studios, but running extremely simply. Don't even really need an operator. You just press auto record, auto switch, and anytime the mics are open, you're cutting, switching, recording, and you can share that to social media. Or if you press stream, you can stream straight to Facebook Live, YouTube Live, etc., and push the content out that way. So we've had incredible success getting these bigger broadcasters sharing content online. Video creates much more shareable media when we come to taking the best of radio and pushing it onto Facebook and to make it shareable, or putting it on YouTube to make it searchable and discoverable. And we want to make that available to studios of any size and broadcasters who just want something they can just set and forget.
So I've got a note in front of me here, and again, Dan wrote our rundown today, so this is great. I'm just following along. Tell Chris and myself what is Gecko and Portal. What are you talking about here?
Well, these are the other things we were going to be talking about and launching at NAB this year. So, COVID changed a little bit what we were focusing on as a business, but in reality, Gecko was all about hosting the back end of our services. So, taking what we do in the studio with Bionic Studio. So we've had this idea that studios should be more intelligent, that the studio technology should be communicating with the other technologies, should be using AI and other technologies to be context aware and doing everything we're doing in studios to make to empower talent to make more compelling original content and talk shows, to really engage audiences around social media, be it with intelligent camera switching and so on, and being commercial. And I'm supposed to say this one first when I speak in the US, to enhance revenue, to allow us to measure and monetize in new ways. And so that was, a story we've been telling and moving slowly the virtualization of just individual components. So, what would ViLoR do next? Well, instead of using, say, blades to host software, it's moving to fully virtualized and running on generic VMs. Instead of running on VMs in your own facility, it's moving it into a hosted, perhaps a managed data center, and then eventually the public internet. And what's happened, instead of going to Vegas and talking about that stuff has just happened. Over the last several weeks, we've been working to virtualize our customers and taking. I knew this was kind of happening when on the 5th of March, which is now a lifetime away. I was in the airport in London, flying to New York to go and see WNYC, one of our customers, a good long-standing customer. They actually have some of our older technology because they were one of the early adopters, and we were going to talk about moving them onto virtual platforms and SIP and so on. Well, I got a text message as I'm in the departure lounge saying that WNYC have closed the building. No one is allowed physically into those premises.
Wow.
No guests, only talent and people producing it. So very kindly, Steve Schultes and the other guys met me still the next day. They all came to a public restaurant, which seemed less safe, but we'll gloss over that. So we all met in a restaurant around the corner, and the topic of discussion changed completely from how are we going to do this managed, transition to SIP and to software, to say we now have this facility, and we cannot bring politicians in, we cannot bring scientists and advisors in, we cannot get the voice of our audience, into the station. How can we re-architect that? And so it really proved that very, very quickly, we just got our software engineers and developers to push our virtualized software onto a virtual machine that they spun up remotely. They put onto an IP audio network to transport it around. Their telephony guys went remotely into the SIP server, ported all the calls across, and in an entirely virtual way, they now have it so that they are screening calls from their living rooms. So if you call WNYC, the producer will answer the call from his living room. He will speak to the caller, just talking through a soft phone on his PC, which is built into the software. And then he holds that call, transfers it to the device. The talent can see that that's on the air. So, we're helping. I guess what Bionics does is, as well as the intelligence stuff, we're about information and control. So lots of people are thinking about how do we shift audio around in a crisis. We're thinking about how do you shift workflows around? How do you shift information and control as well as the audio element? And so those are, Gecko was a big part about generating the ability to have all of that hosted and virtual infrastructure and turning that mainstream. And it's a bit of a drum we've been banging for several years, and people have looked at us funny and gone, why would we do that? And I think what this COVID crisis has done is, I've been saying to people that necessity is the mother of invention. It isn't. Necessity is the midwife of invention. So, because the inventions are already there. People have been talking about, and many people, ViLoR and others, have been doing many of these things. What necessity is, what COVID is the midwife that said we will have to rapidly undergo this relatively painful change. And the way that we've had to do that, and the way that we've learnt that by doing, radio has shifted its comfort zone dramatically in the last 4 or 5 weeks, and has learnt a lot along the way. And so I've been working with our teams on the two phases of what I consider COVID kind of will be. One is what I call the abnormal, which is where we are now. So what we're doing now is not normal. Let's all be clear. I'm sat at home, the devs are sat at home, we're helping our broadcasters stay on the air by any skullduggery we can find. This is not normal. So the first job was to drop everything we were actually designing for NAB and say that doesn't matter because that's not happening. We put all of our development teams on to reorienting and re-architecting our products as quickly as we could, making free licenses available, making easier to install versions to radically get people on the air. And that's been our response to the abnormal. We're now moving to the second phase, which is the new normal, which is that informed and enlightened by the abnormal. When we go back, and we will go back, this is not going to remain. That's why it's abnormal, unprecedented. But when we go back, the new normal will not be the same as it was even on the 5th of March or even on the 5th of February. And some of the stuff we've learned will change the way that we creatively make radio, the workflows that we use around radio, the economics around radio has changed as a result of this. And so, we have the products we were launching at NAB. They were in this direction of virtualization, of hosting stuff. What we didn't really imagine was that all of that stuff would come to fruition and would be used live on air in a kind of big bang type of way quite as quickly as it has done. So we're now, as a firm, looking at the product pipeline, looking at the time horizon of how we bring our customers along on this journey of saying we need, we talked about flexibility and about architecture. But digital agility has become a buzzword of COVID. Being able to turn your entire operation around, as Sunkist did with us, of having no way of getting this show on the air and then figuring something out. That when everything is in software, you have that agility. When everything is IP, you have that agility. When your physical console is a glass console or a physical console you control, you have that agility. So it's taking that virtualization component and just moving it on to the next level of creating agile architecture, flexible workflows, and the kind of ability to react very, very quickly and turn around on a dime.
You are watching or listening to This Week in Radio Tech, episode 491. Our guest, Dan McQuillin, never disappoints. He's got a lot of points to make and a lot of information to bring. Chris Tobin, glad you could make it with us too. Where are you? We didn't get to say hello. And you're on the balcony. I'm
on a balcony overlooking the city streets, enjoying the very vacant. The wind, the weather is changing though. It's getting a little crazy. The rain is coming, but it's fun. I thought I'd stay out in the wind. This way, nothing can catch on to me. It just keeps going.
And I was watching you in the preview monitor when Dan mentioned that Steve Schultz called him and said, "Hey, WNYC, the building's closed." I saw you nod like, "Yep, that happened."
That happened. I was there the day they closed it. Our guest from Global was with me. We left the building as they were getting the notice and they were shutting down.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, Chris, we're gonna move along here, and when we come back, Dan's going to come back and talk to us a bit more about some new things that you would have seen at NAB. And one of these, I don't know much about it, but it sounds really exciting because some thought has gone into what are we really trying to get done. And we got a table and we got a picnic coming up, and I don't know what that means, but it's coming up. This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you in part by Broadcasters General Store, BGS. The website is bgs.cc, and by Vox Pro. We'll be right back.
Yo, what's up? Live from NAB 2018. Hey, it's Caden. You need to check out Wheatstone and Vox Pro 7.1. The upgrades are amazing. If you're a jock, if you're a talent, producer, whatever, morning show, everyone knows Vox Pro, everyone uses Vox Pro, everyone loves Vox Pro, but now the features for this year, 2018, on 7.1 are amazing. If you're using version 4.5.6 and you go to 7, this is exactly what you're missing right here. The features are a game changer. It's going to cut down your editing time by like 80% depending on what you use Vox Pro for. And with version 7.1, introducing unlimited Practic button bars right here, hotkeys right here. I'm going to show you coming out of a song.
Bad things. It's a lot of bad things that they wish and I wish and I wish and I wish.
So you're coming out of your song?
Yeah.
start your next song right here. It's basically an entire production room right on Vox Pro. So it's the Vox Pro we know and love with a ton more features. And now this is the ultimate game changer right here. Effect macros. So instead of hitting your effects button bar and going up here using your mouse for every effect, you do it right here with one click of the mouse. And you're going to cut down your editing time by about 80% without even touching this new sexy black controller. Check it out right here, Wheatstone Vox Pro 7.1 at NAB in Vegas 2018.
Broadcaster General Store, thanks a lot for sponsoring the show, and Vox Pro as well. Hey, whatever you need, Broadcaster General Store has it, bgs.cc. Give them a call at 352-622-7700. And whether you need a Vox Pro or whether you need something from Broadcast Bionics, I think you're going to find it there at Broadcaster's General Store. So check them out. They're very friendly folks, and they're also answering the phones during this interesting time that we're in. Hey, it's Kirk Harnack along with Chris Tobin on episode 491. Hey, we're working through some problems, and I want to thank our producer, Suncast. He totally changed the way that we call into the show because we were having some problems with our usual system. We're all on Skype right now, and usually that's not the best way to call in the show, but for right now, it's doing great. Chris, I'm glad we got you on from New York City, and we're about to talk to Dan McQuillin again in just a minute. But Chris, you have anything to comment on what we've talked about so far?
Well, I think Dan's products and thinking in the, as I've always said, making the workflow more palatable and move about and do things on the fly if you need to, whether it be a pandemic or not, is the best way to do business. And for those of us who need to generate revenue, that's the way to go. But yeah, Steve and the gang at WNYC have done a fine job of utilizing the technology to expand and continue on their growth. And I think many broadcasters these last 5 weeks have discovered the same thing can be done. It just requires some imagination and some thinking and calling the right people to put it all together. Dan's group definitely, without a doubt, has thought about a lot of stuff and has done it right. So I look forward to see more of that happening over the next months.
I like hearing about and seeing the synergy between Dan's group and himself and his developers and some of the folks at the BBC, as well as some other broadcasters in England. It seems like they have an interesting opportunity and a good synergy to explore what's next. And part of that, you may remember Dan talking about a year or two ago about something called Internet Fit, and came out with this interesting notion, open your mind, of cushions and daylight. And Dan, I want to see, you talked about studios just reacting naturally to the people that were in them, what they were talking about, the needs that they had. Where has that idea gone, and what is evolving after that? Because this seems like Star Trek stuff to me. Like, this is just amazing what a studio could do.
No, it isn't really. It's the natural evolution of, if you're imagining a mixing console, once you digitize a mixing console and then you computerize a mixing console, you're not just emulating what a console used to do. It's now a computer, so it can react, it can listen, it can be more intelligent in the same way that your phone is no longer just a rotary dial phone. So it's really just progressing the software and the kind of workflow mindset. And so Internet Fit has been very successful, and our catchphrase over the last few years has been talking about cushions and daylight, the way that we design studio spaces. And by here I'm talking the flagship studio spaces that we're going to do our kind of marquee kind of shows from. But the BBC had a problem, which is that the BBC have 500 studios or audio production spaces that which we're thinking about the design for. And we have a great privilege of working with the BBC and other major broadcasters to do not just engineering, but philosophy and work with them, and also through them have access to practice with and experiment with user experience design with producers and presenters, and look at how spaces are used and inhabited. So that was informing Cushions and Daylight, yes, and these flagship, what I call monolithic large studios. But on top of that, they had this problem that they have 500 radio studios, and it is nowhere near enough. But they're not going to build 500 audio production spaces in the likes of Internet Fit. They need smaller, more agile spaces. So they did a second thought experiment. If Cushions and Daylight is what talent want studios, big studios, to look like, they did a second thought experiment, which I think was really, really smart. which is they said, what is the smallest that a studio can be? So if you take stuff out of a studio, what are you left with? What is it that if you take it away, it is no longer a studio? What is the last essence of something that makes a studio? Okay. So if a Bionic studio or an Internet Fit studio is the most complex or the most advanced a studio can be, what's the simplest? Because they wanted some of those, right? They wanted lots of those and some of these big complicated ones. And so they came up with a premise which I really liked, and they called it the digital table. And they said the simplest a studio could be, if you think about the way we make podcasts and nonlinear stuff right now, is 4 microphones, 4 headphones, and a table. And that's it. And I actually feel sorry for Chris because he's gone one better. He doesn't even have a table. And I've seen week by week, you get somehow to be in the Telos Alliance studio and he gets to be somewhere windswept and homeless. So I want somebody to adopt Chris Tobin because I've spent the last couple of years working with the BBC to define the simplest a studio could possibly be. And Chris doesn't even get that. It's kind of tragic, and we should have some sort of appeal to raise funds, a GoFundMe page to buy Chris a table. But the BBC said, in all seriousness, if you think about it, we need a space to tell the story around. Actually, from a production angle, almost every studio you've ever seen has a physical space that the stuff sits on, and it's, if you like, the storytelling space. It could be a big table, it could be a small table, a high one or a low one. But that was the BBC's definition of digital table. Could we make a studio that was just a flat surface, 4 microphones and 4 headphones, but that could do everything one of those flagship marquee studios could do? You'll notice something. There's nothing on the table. There's no computer. There's no device. It's just 4 headphones, just 4 microphones and a table. And we went away and thought we were working on some stuff in that one range that we mentioned earlier on. I think actually originally was going to be called Studio One. It turns out that someone else with a product called Studio One, and the digital table was a better idea. So Studio One became what we called unimaginatively Bionic Table, of taking that premise and actually making it into a reality. So it is a physical table. You don't have to buy it from us. Get it from IKEA or any purveyor of modern tables or flat surfaces is fine. All you need is 4 microphones. All you need is 4 headphones and a small PoE IP edge device. Think at the moment an Axia X node underneath the table, right? Which happens to take a microphone X node, takes 4 microphones and 4 headphones and just plugs it into that device. And then somewhere in the cloud or in your facility, we created a thing, and we got a bit excited about table-related words here. So the puns are coming thick and fast. We created the table host, which is that you walk up to the table with your own device, and the table has a URL or a beacon that you just tap your device on, and you take control of the table from your own device. So when the 3 of us are around a table, the table is active through those devices. When we turn the lights off and we walk out of the room, all there is in the room is a table, 4 microphones, 4 headphones, and a cheap box under the table. So in the back end, we have this table host, and the table host is providing all of the facilities that a modern studio would have, but in a really, really simple way. There is no mixer, but there is a software mixer running in that host. Yeah. There's no playout system, but there really is a mini piece of software that lets you drag audio onto the table, and when you drop it, it uploads into the host, and the host plays it back with all the levels normalized. It's doing auto mix and auto gain and auto leveling on those microphones, so you can't mess up the levels. It's looking at all the audio on the IP. Remember, multi-object? Well, the table does that. So the host is recording all those microphones as ISOs, as well as doing the auto mix and the auto gain and letting you turn stuff on and off. So you walk up to the table, you drag audio onto it, you speak into it, and what you walk away with at the end is a completely produced podcast as multi-track. You can transmit live. You have access to all of the network audio resources from across the station because it's fully connected to an Axia or a Dante or an AOIP network. So you can, again, select those sources and just drag them and drop them onto the table. But all of that is designed in a way that has the simplest possible user interface, which is all rendered on HTML5 on whatever device. So you walk up to the table, you connect to the table, and you get that very simple interface, which looks a little bit like a remote control. You just drag some audio with your finger and you drop it onto the table, or you drag a microphone and you drop it onto the table. And those little slots you see down there on the bottom of that graphic are what we call utensils. So another philosophical construct here is, at the moment, we mediate all of the way that we control studios and control media through the fader. Everything looks like a fader, which is for sure not the right way to consider something. So when you drop something onto a table, what do you get? Well, on a table you have a utensil. You don't eat your spaghetti with the same thing that you might eat your steak with the same thing that you might eat your soup with, right? So we give you the right utensil. If you drop some audio on, you get a little player. If you drop a telephone call on, because you just automatically get a device generated on the host, and you can control callers. So you get very, very simple utensils, which are tightly bound information and control, which are physically just designed to give you everything you need to manage very, very simply those different elements of audio and codecs and remote sources and so on, without really needing to know what's happening. Most of it happens automatically in the background with auto level and auto mix, but you can drop something on and play it back and cue it and do all of that stuff through that very, very simple utensil based interface. And it's been a really interesting experiment of taking something and de-skilling it to a point where anybody can walk up to one of these surfaces, sit down, and just start to use it. And it distills what we do in broadcast to the storytelling craft of sitting at the table and telling stories. I want anybody who has a compelling original story to tell to be able to sit at a table and tell that story to the world, to stream it live, to transmit it live. It's going out as live or onto the network, so you can put that straight to air or transmission. You can use it for an interview, use it for down the line. You can connect using Anywhere, which is our web RTC codec, to get high quality contribution in. You can bring phone callers in, and you can generate really, really compelling, high quality live or on demand content from a flat surface with 4 microphones and four headphones. And when you turn the lights out and you walk out the room, average BBC radio studio has around 12 PCs in it. Okay, every one of those has an operating system, has a service contract, is costing a couple of $1,000 a year for support and maintenance. When you walk away from the table. So we want a table to be, every BBC meeting room table, we hope will become a table, a Bionic table. The corner of every BBC office should be Bionic tables. So instead of 500 large studio spaces that are always full and there isn't enough, you should just have hundreds, if not thousands of tables. And when you walk up to a table, you log in to a table as what we call a setting. So when you set the table, you say, this is Chris and Dan and Kirk. And if we use this table today, we run and use another table tomorrow, just all of our stuff just arrives, right? All the audio is on the table, all of our settings on the table, all of our recordings and so on are just there. So this is not how my mother will make podcasts. There are Behringer devices. There are really good little things for doing home podcasts. This is how people with infrastructure will scale that infrastructure to say, and we've talked now to so many broadcasters around the world who said, oh, thank goodness for the table, because we keep being asked for something else. And we're like, we didn't know what it was. They're like, we know we have to build studios and we know what those are. But people kept saying, could you build like a thing that was like we need to do some podcasts, we need to do this. What is that? And we've tried to define that as what the BBC would call a digital table, or what we call a Bionic table. It is an audio production space, which is sub a studio in terms of cost, in terms of complexity, in terms of skilled operation, but it delivers in a much simpler format everything that one of those big traditional studios would do for 1% of the cost. And can deliver that in a very, very compact form factor that you can put anywhere and everywhere to give yourself the flexibility to be generating lots and lots of content very, very rapidly from a huge array of spaces. Now, there is one thing which I really wish we had done before COVID, because we did the first demo table to the BBC just before we got locked down. In fact, we were going to do a second on-site demo with the BBC that got cancelled because we couldn't get the table into the building, and they were going to bring some more producers and presenters. So this is right now a prototype. It was going to be at NAB. We had a 50% bigger stand this year, and there's going to be a whole area with a really nice table made by the same people who make Apple Store tables. Yeah. With 4 microphones and 4 headphones. But there is an extra bit that you teased, which we call Picnic, which is the idea of controlling a table. Because remember, a table is just HTML5, but it's moving the edge device from that AOIP device under the physical table to WebRTC on your tablet. So the three of us could be doing this show over WebRTC, sitting around a table in a virtual format. You can control the table, you can control the studio, you can play back audio, you can control the mix, do all the multi-track recording, but we're just sat at home using a phone or a tablet and using the audio via WebRTC from that device into the center. So we have Bionic Table, which is doing all that with low latency physically in the same location, or we have Bionic Picnic, which is exactly the same technology, but the edge device becomes remote and the interface becomes WebRTC. The difference is geographic latency. So if we're all in the same physical space, you do need that low latency because I can see your lips and it's kind of weird. And
Yeah.
So if we're all in one space, you need that little PoE box under the table, and we're making a show, and that's all you need. But if we're not in the same geographical space, or if three of us are around the table and Chris is, homeless somewhere in New York in a bus shelter, that's fine. He's used to that. He's robust. He just comes in as the picnic, and he can join the table equally. But he has not just information, but full control. On a phone, you can get 2 utensils to do a cough and a playback, and control your headphones and stuff. On an iPad, you get 8 utensils. On a computer, you get 16 or more. So this is really about, I hope, philosophizing about the future of radio production. We need to make these flagship internet fit studios more intelligent and more advanced, but we need to democratize that and generate this additional form of production space that will give a different cost point. And we want newspapers and magazines and TV stations and all sorts of non-traditional broadcasters to host fleets of tables that people can come and tell their story, come and record their story, come and transmit their story. I'd like WNYC in New York to have 6 tables in a space somewhere, and people just come in and act as storytellers, and they have access to the content and they're curating the content. So at the moment, it's real. We have we have 5 tables ready to go into the BBC for the first prototypes. We have a beautiful table which is sat somewhere in my office, locked down, that should have been in Vegas last week. I've flown around the world and talked about this in Australia and talked about it to WNYC and other of our customers. But the first time we were going to publicly discuss this concept and show it was going to be at Vegas. So while we all stayed home and our hair all grew to look like Kirk's, in fact, the world was trying some of this technology and trying to do various things of using WebRTC, of using virtualization and software. And in fact, we're bringing that in what we've done in these flagship studios with Bionic Studio. We're doing it with a one range of products to a much more affordable, discrete level. And we think the table fills in that gap of, I bet as an engineer, someone's asked you to build something and you've gone, well, that's not a studio, but I don't know what that is. I just wonder if a table might perhaps be a description of that other space.
That sounds like a great candidate. Absolutely. Wow. Was there one more was there a diagram picture we're going to look at, the Bionic table diagram? Was that included or not? There we go. Yeah.
So this just shows a little bit more about what, because this is a geeky crowd, right? So we can get a little bit behind the details. So on the left-hand side, you can see 3 tables, and they are just that. They're just tables. Each one has 4 microphones and 4 headphones. It has a little node underneath to bring the audio to and from, but there's no mixer, there's no physical control, there's no PC. And then there is this host, which is hosting a web surface, a URL, which each of those tables can connect to. And that table host is one of those running across the entire enterprise, or one of those hosted on the internet that you can connect to remotely. We happen to have recently bought table.host as an internet domain. But the BBC would have its own host somewhere around their building, and all of their tables connecting back to that. Then, using virtualization, there is a fully software virtual mixer, which is being spun up in a virtualized Docker container in the host, and we can spin those up and down dynamically. So if you have 300 tables, but you only want 100 of them working simultaneously, then we only need to spin up 100 mixers. We have the table to audio engine, which provides basic audio playout, normalization, hotkeys, etc. It also provides a hybrid and the codecs to do all of the kind of WebRTC audio for Picnic and for remote guests, and for bringing just regular SIP telephone calls and G711 and Opus calls, etc. in. And then the table.recorder, again, we can spin up any number of instances of that to do the recording from the tables. That's a stereo record from the table and a multi-object record of all of the different streams. So we can give you back an Adobe Audition file, which is your podcast, as TWiRT, as we did it live here, but with the ability to unmix it and remix it and kind of tweak it and tighten it or add some extra production audio and so on. So there's a single virtual machine, which is your host, and then there are a scalable series of containers and machines which are spinning up those other resources, and each one of those controls about 8 tables. So it's really very, very efficient and very effective, and there's no physical plant at all. There's just VMs running somewhere in your facility, or even potentially somewhere out on the cloud.
Oh my gosh. Wow. This is a lot to wrap my head around. I'm gonna have to go back and watch my own show here, I think, to pick up on some of the nuances that you've talked about. Dan, we're approaching the end of the show. We've got an announcement to make, and then you've proposed to do some kind of a virtual giveaway, and you've proposed this. I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you tease a little bit about what we're going to be doing after the spot break?
So we didn't get. Oh, hello! I've gone all Chernobyl. So we didn't all get to go to Vegas, and one of the things that people do in Vegas is they stock up on T-shirts and merchandise for the year.
Right.
So I have a really nice Apple Store table back at the office, and I probably also have cartons full of T-shirts and hats and things. So I wanted that. This is episode 491. I wanted to do something virtual that's never been done before. So we're going to give you some virtual NAB merchandise.
Okay. So are we doing? Are we going to talk about it? Are we going to do an actual giveaway? Maybe I'm just not conceptualizing this yet.
I am hoping that the Sunkist people have some graphics that I sent you on one of those is a code, which is all your listeners and viewers need to take away. Is that code.
Okay. All right.
And that will by the power of virtualization will we've been able to virtualize virtually everything about radio studios. We virtualized the mixers. We virtualized the only thing we couldn't do is virtualize the microphones, the headphones, and if I could have virtualized a haircut, I wouldn't have hair that's long. But we're software people, we're not hardware people, so that's what. But everything else we've made virtual, and we've done it now, I think, for the first time ever with our merchandise.
All right. So to translate this into my head, stay tuned. We're giving away some cool stuff, and just watch for the codes after the break, and Dan will talk us through it. Hey, here's the break. What you need, if you don't have a real internet connection, you can get one this way. This is the Max Connect wireless service, and it can work in lots of different styles of 4G modems. This happens to be a Cradlepoint one, but it's not about the Cradlepoint. It's about the service. With Max Connect wireless, you get prioritized data. Yeah, you get prioritized over all those other schmucks at the parade or at the stadium when we can all get back together again. You get prioritized data so that if you've tried doing a live remote broadcast or tried getting maybe STL data out to your transmitter site, live audio, and you found that, hey, it works most of the time, but not all the time. Well, this is the answer. The Max Connect wireless service, you can get it with a modem or bring your own. Talk to Max Connect about that, and you get good data. Not only good data, but great data, because you don't drop packets, and you get a fixed IP address. That's critical for a lot of ways to send audio to your transmitter site. So you can take this out on remote with you. You can put it at your transmitter site. There are broadcasters in the US and Canada that are really picking up on this now. And there are now hundreds of these Max Connect wireless devices that are acting as a backup or even as a primary way to go out and do broadcasts. Chris Tobin, I wonder if you might comment on just a minute about your experience with the Max Connect wireless service in doing live broadcasts in New York City.
It's happened to me a couple of times. As Dan pointed out, I do find myself on rooftops and sometimes in very strange positions, places out on a beach or sometimes a park and a river. And the Max Connect has helped greatly. And the nice thing is I did a couple of sporting events with a friend who was using the Max Connect. And oddly enough, the other broadcasters at the event we were at were having troubles with their wireless setup, and we were just humming right along and enjoying everything that we did. So I have to say it works. Do understand you're at the mercy of the cellular industry, so if they decide to do certain things, you may get throttled down a bit because that's what they have for backhaul. But at least with Max Connect and the prioritizing that takes place, you should stay connected and do very well. And I've done it in Times Square. I've done it down in Union Square. Also, I was using it at the World Trade Center once before they got the in-house cellular system, so it's actually pretty good. And it works out nice. And with a battery pack, you can really get mobile and do some stuff. So between that, digital table, you're off to the races. I think you're in great shape.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And I've been at live remote broadcasts with you and with Sam Wu, and this is the device that's getting used, the Max Connect wireless. Thanks a lot to Josh Bone. Give them a call or an email and check them out on the website, maxconnectwireless.com. All right, it's time to do a giveaway. And Dan, I want you to talk us through this. Suncast has the graphics ready. If you're watching, you need to pay attention. If you're listening, too bad, because we'll put this graphic in the show notes. But tell us what we got to know here, Dan.
Well, Kirk, you've bigged this up way too much. But yes, I've been doing several things during lockdown. If you follow us on Facebook, you've seen I've been jet washing things. I've been studying Stoic philosophy. But the other thing I've been doing is playing Animal Crossing, which is the sensational Nintendo Switch game, which is why if you try and buy a Nintendo Switch, you cannot, because everyone is playing Animal Crossing. So if you have been playing Animal Crossing, we have a TWiRT virtual exclusive for you, which is there is my Animal Crossing character, complete with Broadcast Bionics t-shirt and Broadcast Bionic Cap. So if you or your loved ones play Animal Crossing, if you put these two maker codes in, people who play the game will know, then these are the codes to unlock. So that first code, MOGM80D90C P5YC. If you put that in to Animal Crossing, you will be wearing a Broadcast Bionics cap. And if you put the t-shirt code in below, I haven't put the code in for those nice Cushions and Daylight cushions, but if you DM me, I will send you the code to have yourself a Cushions and Daylight cushion. But that is how desperate I have become for home entertainment. That really is my little Animal Crossing house in the background there, and my Animal Crossing avatar, replete with my Broadcast Bionic merchandise. So we're sorry that we don't get to see you this year, both Chris and Kirk. I think as an industry, we've learned a lot by not going to Vegas, but do not get me wrong. I am really, really hoping we all go back to Vegas next year, that you get to see the wonderful physical table, that I get to give you some wonderful physical T-shirts, because the radio industry is important, and never more so than at this time. And I'm proud of the way that our development teams and sales teams and support teams have kept broadcasters on the air, but more importantly, the way that our broadcast partners have, within minutes, taken a constantly evolving situation and really managed to perform some quite incredible leaps of digital and acoustical agility. So radio will get out of this abnormal, and there will be a new normal, and we will find ways to thrive creatively and digitally together. And I look forward to doing that over the next few months, and to getting to see everybody again next year in Las Vegas.
Dan, you have inspired me, and Chris, I've got a 9-year-old son. He's got a Nintendo Switch. He begged for one for Christmas, and so Santa brought him one. And I have avoided the Switch because if I play Fortnite like he does, I last about 4 seconds. Not even a fortnight, just 4 seconds. So we're going to get Animal Crossing. We're going to put the codes in, and by golly, I will be properly attired in this. Chris, is a Nintendo Switch part of your life?
No, but I have my nephews and nieces that I know have been playing that, so I will be contacting them. And I love it. This is absolutely brilliant. This is absolutely great. I love it. Unbelievable. This is absolutely brilliant. Let's see if we've got it. But hey, Dan, if you do make it to New York City to see Steve and the gang, let me know, because I know those guys well, so we can hook up. I'm told there's a few places. I'm told a friend of mine who's from your neck of the woods tells me there's a couple of good places that bring him back to home. So I'm going to find out where they are. So when you're in town, you can tell me if it's really true or not.
Yeah, I mean, I spend quite a lot of time in New York, and this is one of the unusual things for me is I'm just locked down in what was the kids' playroom, is now I guess my study during this. I travel a lot, and it turns out my wife is deeply frustrated that I'm not traveling as much as normal, because I am absolutely adorable in very short doses. And then regularly I travel. So yeah, the person who's suffering most is the long-suffering Zoe, who is used to me being home for a couple of weeks and then disappearing off. So I frequently have the absolute privilege of flying and working with broadcasters in New York and across the US and Australia, and I was right the way through until this lockdown. And it appears as if probably I would imagine for the rest of at least this calendar year, I don't think that's going to be happening. But the wonderful thing about being a software company is we are virtual. That as a company, we were all able to very quickly and safely work from home. And that's the privilege of being in broadcasting is carrying on and just finding these new creative ways to work. So the abnormal will last for a few more weeks, I imagine, in a couple of months. I think the no traveling thing will probably last maybe through the end of the year. But absolutely, as soon as we are no longer locked down to the country, I will take Chris Tobin up on the offer of going out for a drink, and I will buy that dude a table, because I think we need some sort of telethon or some GoFundMe page to buy him some walls. Every time I watch him, he's itinerantly homeless. So this is very concerning.
You know what? Next week I have a good idea to be somewhere, so it's gonna be fun.
Chris may consider himself an urban outdoorsman by choice.
That's it. Exactly. It is by choice. I will tell you that.
Oh man, guys, we got to go. We're a bit over time. I got to thank. There's so much to be thankful for here. Dan McQuillin, thank you for spending over an hour with us. It's great to hear your ideas, and you're very inspiring. And I can't wait to see you in person again. Thanks a lot for being here.
Pleasure, guys. Stay safe.
And also thanks for the virtual kit. We will put that graphic and codes on the show notes. If you missed that, you can get it from there. Chris Tobin, thank you for working hard to join us, even though it was late. I know we had to change everything around, so thanks a lot.
That's how it happens. I roll with anything. I'm cool with that.
And I want to thank Suncast. Oh my goodness, you talk about scrambling. This guy figured it out. When one whole system didn't work, he got us moved over to another system based on Skype to get us on the air, and it just thank you so much for getting that going. Thanks to Andrew Zarian also, who helped out. I think he said, yeah, sure enough, that's not going to work. So thanks Andrew. Be sure you watch the other fine podcasts on the GFQ network. Really good stuff. All right, we got to go. Next week, another exciting show, and we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech. Bye-bye.